You can feel it even when you don't have the words. Something in you is quietly starving while your phone keeps feeding you noise. You thought connection would make you less alone, but it's training you to perform empathy instead of living it. In the modern digital age, you don't just use platforms. You get shaped by them. You are given a world where every emotion can be packaged, posted, measured, rewarded, and sold back to you. And the cruel joke is this: the more connected you become, the harder it is to feel real human presence. Today, I'm going to take you into the anatomy of that trap, not with vague moral advice, with psychological mechanisms, with the way your nervous system changes, with the way online environments rewire your ability to read another human being, and with the way entire industries profit from your loneliness by keeping you slightly disconnected from everyone who could actually hold you. This is the matrix of virtual relationships. It's not a science fiction theme, it's a lived experience. It's the way you scroll past grief while you're expected to react. It's the way you argue while hiding behind a username. It's the way you like someone's life while nobody knows your real pain. It's the way you can have thousands of contacts and still freeze when you need a single honest hand. And yes, I'm going to be uncomfortable, because the uncomfortable truth is the only door out. Let's start with a brutal paradox. We have never had more ways to reach people, and we have never been more alone. That loneliness doesn't just come from missing bodies near you. It comes from missing actual attunement, missing eye contact, missing tone of voice, missing the tiny biological feedback loops your brain relies on to know what another person is really experiencing. You might have 5,000 friends on a platform. You might have a feed full of faces. You might even receive messages. But when you're at your lowest, there is often no one you can reach who can actually meet you. Not because they don't care. Sometimes they care deeply, but they can't reach the real you because you've taught them that your real you is never accessible. And you taught yourself the same lesson. You learned to keep a polite distance from your own emotions. You learned to translate feelings into content. You learned that if you want to be seen, you need to perform being okay. So you perform. Presence gets replaced with performance. Empathy gets replaced with signals. You can see it everywhere if you know how to look. Someone posts a photo with a sad caption. You don't see their internal state. You see a graphic, a text overlay, a curated image. You see a version of them. And because your brain has fewer sensory cues, it has less reason to engage the deep empathic circuits that normally activate in real life. Empathy is not a philosophical vibe. It's a biological process. It needs data. It needs faces. It needs the micro expressions that happen when someone is trying to hold themselves together. It needs the rhythm of speech when someone is afraid. It needs the warmth or coldness in a person's voice, the involuntary pauses, the way they breathe when they're telling the truth or when they're lying. When you sit across from a real person, your brain has to work. It has to simulate their emotional state. It uses the entire body as information. It reads their eyes. It reads their posture. It reads their nervous system in real time. Your brain mirrors them because mirroring is how humans learn to survive together as a species. But on a screen, all that gets compressed into pixels and permissions. Your attention moves like a camera, not like a witness. Your empathy turns into a click. You see an image of distress instead of distress itself. You see a status update instead of the tremor in their hands. You see a thumbnail instead of the smell of their fear. You see a sad story instead of the moment their voice cracks. And because the cues are missing, the response becomes thinner. Over time, the result is not just emotional numbness, it's empathic atrophy. Your nervous system starts adapting to a world that doesn't require deep emotional work. Why invest in full-bodied attunement when the platform rewards quick reactions? Why practice patience and depth when outrage and speed get more attention? The system is training you, and it does it by removing the biological triggers that make empathy costly and real. Now, here's the part people avoid, because it makes them look responsible for their own collapse. Your online behavior isn't neutral. Your nervous system learns from repetition. If you spend hours absorbing curated emotion, you start to treat emotion like content. And if you treat emotion like content, you stop treating people like people. Imagine what happens when you're watching a tragedy unfold through a feed. Your brain receives constant stimulation, but it doesn't receive full presence. It receives second-hand representation. The deeper circuits that would normally force you to slow down and respond with care become optional. The only circuits you keep using are attention and appraisal, so you become someone who can watch pain without being changed by it. This is why people in some developed countries can become unusually cruel online. They say things they would never say in person. They write curses while their hands are still, while their face is safe behind a mask. That mask is psychological. It's not just anonymity, it's the lack of immediate embodied consequence. When you argue on a forum or in comment sections, you don't see the person's eyes. You don't feel the silence that would happen if you spoke the same sentence face to face. You only see text. You only see a name and a profile image like a label on a shelf. This creates a phenomenon: online disinhibition. Your internal brakes weaken. The mirror neurons that would normally make your words feel like they have a human impact don't get the full input they need. The person on the other side feels less like a living organism and more like an obstacle, a data object, a target. So you let yourself become what you would call your worst self, and you do it with the clean conscience of distance. And distance is the selling point, because distance is what allows exploitation. If empathy can be dulled, profit becomes easier. If emotional investment can be harvested and replaced with artificial engagement, the system can extract your time, your attention, and eventually your loyalty. Now let's talk about how the system turns empathy into something you don't own anymore. There is a reason the platforms look like casinos and marketplaces. There is a reason dating apps look like product catalogs, because they are built on the logic of consumption. In a marketplace, you don't fall in love. You browse, you compare, you swipe, you discard. The mind learns to treat other people as replaceable items. And when you treat a person as a replaceable item, you remove the conditions that make commitment possible. Commitment requires patience. It requires tolerating complexity. It requires staying with discomfort long enough for real connection to emerge. But online systems are designed to maximize choice, and too much choice doesn't create freedom, it creates restlessness. When every potential partner is just one more option away, your brain never settles. It never learns to repair. It never practices reconciliation. A small conflict becomes an exit, not a conversation. Instead of empathic repair, you look for a new match. Instead of let's understand each other, you ask, how do I replace this? That's not romance. That's consumer psychology wearing a heart-shaped costume. And dating is only one surface. The deeper transformation is what happens to your sense of personhood. The platforms reduce humans into profiles. A person becomes a curated set of images, a few words that can be optimized, a score you can never fully see, a brand you're expected to maintain. You don't meet a multi-dimensional human being with wounds, histories, contradictions, and hidden needs. You meet a profile that tries to look safe, desirable, and effortless. And your own profile becomes a performance. You learn to hide the messiness that actually makes you lovable. You learn to sanitize your identity so you can be marketable. You start asking yourself not how do I feel, but how do I look? So empathy suffers in both directions. People can't access your real self, and you can't access their real self. The result is a world of PR versions of everyone. Then comes the weaponization of emotion. Online algorithms don't reward complexity, they reward intensity, they reward anger, they reward fear, they reward outrage. It's not because the creators are evil geniuses, it's because anger is sticky. It keeps you scrolling, it keeps you reacting, it creates more comments, more shares, more fights. The system measures engagement like a hunger, it feeds on attention. Outrage becomes a fuel source, so the platforms show you enemies. They show you enemies that look like them, and them gets simplified until it's no longer a person. You don't experience a human mind, you experience a threat label. This is how empathy gets narrowed. First, you stop seeing the other person as a human. Then you stop trying to understand them. Then empathy becomes tribal. You empathize with your group and you harden toward outsiders. That's what polarization does at scale. It doesn't happen only through ideology, it happens through psychological design. Once someone is labeled as an enemy, empathy doesn't just weaken, it gets switched off. This is why political and social spaces can feel like an endless brawl. People don't argue to find truth, they argue to win a status contest. They argue to avoid shame by becoming certain. They argue because the algorithm rewards certainty more than it rewards understanding. And in a world like that, the real enemy is not your opponent. The enemy is your ability to feel connected through shared humanity. Now, let's go further. The biggest betrayal isn't that platforms show you fake versions of people. It's that they can make you feel connected while stealing your actual capacity for connection. Think about influencers. Why do so many people feel a strange intimacy with someone they have never met? Because your brain is vulnerable to illusion. Your brain understands relationships through patterns. If someone speaks to you in a way that resembles closeness, your nervous system can interpret it as relational safety. If they post consistently, if they narrate their emotions, if they share the details of their day, your brain starts to simulate attachment. You begin to feel like you know them. But it's one way. You give attention, you give time, you give emotional energy, you give reactions, you might even gift money. You're building a relationship with an image, and the influencer receives it as a metric, as a count, as a revenue stream. Their side is not mutual presence, their side is content production. You are building empathy towards someone who cannot mirror you back with real responsibility, and that mismatch is corrosive because you end up spending your limited empathic energy on an emotional investment that cannot mature into real bonding. This is one of the core ways loneliness becomes a business model. A person with a rich real-life social world doesn't need 6 hours of live streams. A person who has stable companionship and actual conversations doesn't chase artificial warmth. But platforms don't just want users. They want users who feel a little missing, a little hungry, a little unfilled. That hunger creates repeat consumption, so the system schedules your need. It keeps you slightly dissatisfied. It keeps you scanning for something that will finally complete you, and it teaches you to trust that completion will come through another scroll, another video, another message, another platform update. You start to believe that connection is an endless product. And while you chase the illusion of closeness, the real humans around you become background noise. Your neighbors, your friends, your family, the people you could sit with, the people who would actually recognize your effort and your truth. They don't trigger the same intensity. They don't have algorithms. They don't have curated visuals. They don't always entertain you, so you neglect them, and then you feel guilty, and guilt makes you open to more distractions. It's a loop, a psychological loop designed to keep you on the inside of the machine. Now, I want to address something else people refuse to admit. Online culture trains you to show empathy on command. It turns feeling into an obligation. When a shocking event happens somewhere in the world, you're pressured to respond. You're pressured to post a statement. You're pressured to change your profile picture. You're pressured to take a stance quickly enough to prove you're not uncaring. If you stay silent, you're labeled as cold. But this is not empathy. This is compliance theater. Real empathy doesn't require approval from strangers. Real empathy comes with private discomfort. Real empathy asks you to slow down. Real empathy asks you to listen to the person who is suffering, not to perform your moral position for the crowd. When feeling becomes mandatory branding, the emotion loses its soul. It becomes a checkbox. And when your emotions become checkboxes, your heart becomes a machine component. You stop having an inner experience. You start having an output. So many people post grief not because their hearts are breaking, but because they are afraid of social punishment. They feel exposed. They don't want to be labeled. They don't want to lose belonging. And that means their emotional expression is driven by fear more than connection. The matrix of virtual relationships doesn't only dull your empathy, it redirects your emotional energy into safety-seeking performance. It makes you manage perception rather than reality. Now there's a final layer, and it's the one that hurts the most if you're honest about yourself. Social media creates a world of constant comparison. People look happier, people look richer, people look more successful, people look more loved. You don't see their nights, you don't see their silent desperation. You don't see the fights behind closed doors. You don't see their therapy sessions. You see thumbnails and headlines. And comparison kills empathy because empathy requires attention to the other person's actual internal reality. Comparison turns attention inward into your own insecurity. Jealousy becomes a thief of connection. When you spend hours resenting other people's projected lives, you stop making space for the messy humanity of those people. You stop asking, how are they really surviving? And you start asking, why am I not like that? And from there, empathy collapses. Because resentment is not a bridge. Resentment is a wall. So yes, you may feel busy, you may feel involved, you may feel informed, but you're often not connecting. You're consuming reflected illusions. You're talking through filters. You're hiding behind editing tools. You're hiding behind selective truth. You're curating your identity so thoroughly that no real vulnerability can breathe. And in that environment, even if someone tries to be real with you, you don't know how to meet them because you've trained your nervous system to expect a performance. The result is a desert of emotional reality. Everything looks alive, but nothing touches your bloodstream. Everything looks bright, but nothing warms you. Now you might be thinking, okay, so what do I do? You can't fix this by uninstalling everything and pretending the damage didn't happen. Your brain has already adapted. It already learned shortcuts. It already learned to seek stimulation instead of presence. But there is a way out. Not a trendy fix. Not another app. Not another wellness slogan. Freedom in this era is not measured by how many followers you have. It's measured by how much real presence you can access again, how much you can reclaim your ability to feel another human being without needing an interface. So here are the rules to begin the emotional rewiring. First, establish strict presence boundaries. Not boundaries for being offline as a hobby, but boundaries for how your nervous system learns to process emotion. You need to separate connection information from actual connection. Information is what you consume. It's news, opinions, updates, debates, content, everything that triggers your attention without requiring your heart. Actual connection requires a living back and forth. It requires eye contact. It requires voice. It requires timing. It requires the courage to feel awkward. It requires the ability to sit with discomfort and not escape into a new feed. So make a rule. Stop resolving emotional conflicts through messages. If something matters, it doesn't deserve a text thread where you can hide behind timing and misinterpretation. A text conversation is a padded room. It reduces accountability. It makes dishonesty easier. It makes it easier to win instead of understand. If you want to rebuild empathy, your brain needs to see tone. Your brain needs to feel breath. Your brain needs to read microsignals again. So choose meetings, face to face, or at least voice calls that force real vocal nuance. Give yourself a non-negotiable ritual. If it's emotionally important, it requires physical presence or voice presence. It requires you to be seen in real time. 15 minutes across from a person is not the same as 15 months of messaging, and your body knows this, even if you pretend you don't. Second, break the culture of performance and accept your rough edges. This is harder than most people want to admit because it challenges their survival strategy. Many people use the internet as a coping mechanism for shame. They don't want to be honest because honesty risks rejection, so they become curated, they become optimized, they become a product, they become someone who is always responding correctly, always looking competent, always emotionally manageable. But empathy cannot grow on perfected surfaces. True empathic connection grows in the messy soil of sincerity. It grows where people are allowed to be unfinished, where they can admit fear, where they can say, I don't know, where they can look slightly ugly without being punished for it. So start small. Practice being human online with less. Less posting, less performance, less chasing validation, less turning your life into an audition. And most importantly, stop using filters for your emotional truth. If you only show the highlight reel, you train other people to relate to your mask. You also train yourself to fear the real you. Let yourself be vulnerable with people who have earned it. Let yourself fail in front of trusted friends. Let yourself be awkward. Let yourself say, I need help, without turning it into a dramatic story arc designed to inspire applause. Your emotions should belong to you, not to trends. When you regain emotional sovereignty, you become less controllable, because a platform profits when you are guided by what gets rewarded. You need to be guided by what is true instead. And yes, this will feel like withdrawal, because you've been feeding your nervous system with social rewards, and now you're removing the drug. So expect resistance. Expect the urge to check how you're perceived. Expect the fear that silence equals invisibility. That fear is not truth, it's conditioning. Third, perform a digital tribal cleansing. This means you need to stop donating your empathic energy to strangers who will never meet you. You don't need to broadcast every opinion. You don't need to argue with random internet objects just to prove you exist. Those conflicts are often empty because they're not built for understanding. They're built for performance, too. So stop feeding the machine with your attention. Stop using your heart as a fuel source for people who don't care about you as a person. Unfollow, mute, quiet entire communities that turn every topic into hatred, not because you suddenly become morally perfect, but because your nervous system needs less poison. Choose a smaller circle. Smaller doesn't mean worse. Smaller means deeper. Give your energy to people who can actually hold you, people who notice your absence, people who ask questions in real conversation, people who show up when you don't post. And don't underestimate the power of local relationships. Neighborhood connections are slower, harder, and more real. They require patience, but they rebuild your human spine. Start with the people right next to you. Family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, anyone who can share ordinary life with you, anyone you can help in a tangible way. Because empathy is not something you can manufacture alone. Empathy grows through reciprocal presence. Now, the darkest truth is this: the Matrix wants you lonely so it can sell you simulated closeness forever. It wants you emotionally underfed so you'll consume what it provides. It wants you distracted so you won't notice your own life shrinking. It wants you dependent on attention metrics because attention metrics control your behavior. And it wants you divided so you can't form real solidarity with other humans, because a community that truly sees each other cannot be easily exploited. It's harder to manipulate people who feel bonded. It's harder to redirect a united heart. So the system breaks empathy at the biological level. Then it replaces the broken ability with entertainment and outrage. It turns human beings into units. Units can be moved. Units can be targeted. Units can be bought. But you are not just a unit. You carry evolutionary wiring for connection that was built long before screens existed. Your mirror neurons can return to function when you stop starving them. Your empathic circuits can become strong again when you give them real input. So here is your call to action, and it's not complicated. Put the phone down, not as a dramatic act, as a daily decision. Step outside, feel air, notice light, walk near other humans. Look someone in the eyes and hold the gaze long enough for your brain to remember what presence feels like. Listen to breathing. Listen for pauses. Listen for emotion that is not optimized. Touch your own life again. Bring your attention back to what is real. And when you feel the urge to return to the feed, don't shame yourself. Understand what's happening. Your nervous system is looking for familiar stimulation because it hasn't finished rebuilding trust in real connection yet. Be patient with yourself, but don't lie to yourself. The goal is not to be good at being offline. The goal is to stop living as a ghost, to stop being a digital reflection, to come back to your own heart. Because a real hand reaching out is not just affection, it's rebellion against the machine that wants you fragmented. Welcome back to the human world. Welcome back to your own heart. And remember this when you feel tempted to scroll again. A real person cannot be replaced. A real conversation cannot be swapped for a new highlight reel. A real embrace cannot be replicated by an algorithm. So rise and stand up, not with slogans, with presence, with boundaries, with sincerity, with the quiet courage to be real where it matters, face to face.